Coming to you live from the shadow of the big house, it's IT4U. Tips and tricks on ITS tools, products, services, and more with your host, Gene Mackey. Hey, good morning everybody, and welcome to IT4U. I'm your host, Gene Mackey. These are interactive webinars brought to you by Information and Technology Services. If you are having any audio or video problems, let us know in the chat pod, and if it's not on our end, we'll have some tips. If you're watching the YouTube caption version of this, look in the description field for the Google Doc with live links. Those of you who are here live, man, I cannot talk this morning. Look in the web links, and that's where the Google Doc is. It's got a bunch of resources. If you do need an accommodation to participate, just let us know. What's coming up? Digital signs. I don't know if any of you here today do digital signs, but if so, we've got one coming up next week on that topic. And then the next business objects topic will be with Deb Lennington, who is one of our most sophisticated users on campus, I would say, about input controls, because they're a little bit different in BI4. So, what do we got today? Formulas and variables. And it's funny because the last time I did this, I had 3 people in the virtual room, so it's nice to have a little more interest. Would you like a copy of my demo report? So there's a very fascinating universe called eFashion. And whenever you go to create a new document, but everybody has access to it, and since this is truly about the tool, I put a bunch of formulas in an eFashion report that you'll all be able to get to. So you would just go to the public folders, User Shared, Mackie J, IT4U sample reports, and you can copy the IT4U55, not the old one, sample formulas. But yeah, User Shared folder is going away by the end of the month, so don't wait too long. So what the heck is a formula in Business Objects? A formula can be used to display dynamic information. Like a constant, if I just typed in today's date, the next time I open the report, that date would be old. But if I use a formula, it's going to check the date every time I run it. Carry out calculations, custom groupings of data, conditional filters for data display, and much, much more. A few rules, I'll just say these and then we'll actually take a look at them. Formulas start with an equal sign. Variable, or you could call it a field or an object. The name in a formula is enclosed in brackets. If you're going to put some text in your formula, it starts and ends with double quotes, and it's joined or concatenated to the rest of the formula with a plus sign. Here's an example. So if this formula would say account, colon, and then the account description. Functions are followed by parentheses, so sum is a function, so sum of dollar amount, I'm going to enclose dollar amount in parentheses. You can turn a formula into a variable. So there's variables that are in the universe that you can't change, but you can create your own variables that are local to a particular report. And once you do that, and I say more about this in the documents that I've linked in the Google Doc, but when you turn a formula into a variable, it's just more powerful. You can filter it, you can put a break on it, you can section on it, so you can do things that you can't do with a formula, and then it makes it easy to use if you want to use it multiple times in your report. And again, you don't have to remember this because that was just kind of a little overview. And now we're going to show it. Let me share my screen. Here we are. And did I already have that report open? Yes, here it is. All right, so this is called Sample Formulas for IT4U55. And I just put a little note in the first report tab here. Make sure the design tab is selected up here. And if you don't have the formula bar displayed, you would go to Properties, View, and then select formula bar. Okay? And it only has highlighted when you actually click on a formula, click in a cell. All right, so here's some formulas. Let's look at this one. So if you look up here, what do we got? Last refresh plus last execution date. Let's take a look at that in the formula bar. So if you look at the formula bar, it's got, here's some components. We've got this little window where you type the actual formula. You've got this that opens the formula editor. If I wanted to turn this into a variable, I can do it right here, create a variable. I can also do it under available objects over here, but we're not going to look at that right now. If I make some changes to the formula and I change my mind, I can cancel my changes with this little X. And if I want to make sure that the formula is correct, uses the correct syntax, I can use that little green check mark. I can also just hit enter. What does syntax mean? It means that there's certain characters that business objects formulas expect. So what we were just talking about, the correct syntax is it starts with an equal sign. Right? That's syntax. If I have a function, it's got these open and close parens, even though for last execution date there's actually nothing in the parens. But let's open up the formula editor and let's make it a little bigger. So what do we got here? Started with an equal sign. This is text. So the last refresh colon space is text, and it's enclosed in double quotes. And then if I look in available functions, last execution date is a function, and I'm thinking it'll be under date and time. And I'd be wrong because it's under data provider, I bet. Yes. So here's what's nice about the formula editor. If I click on last execution date, it gives me a description. Tells me the last date on which a data provider, or query, is another word for it, was refreshed. Here's the very handy thing, more on this function. I use this a lot. I'm going to open it up right now. It tells me what it is, but the most useful thing is the example. So if I'm confused about exactly what it's expecting in terms of syntax, these examples are very useful. So it shows last execution date. If you wanted to make it specific to a particular query, like one called sales query, you would put that in the parens. But anyway, I gave you a link to a whole PDF, a rather long PDF from the vendor on formulas, but all of that is right here. If you click more on this function, the whole thing is here. So you can see over here if I want to look at other functions. So that entire document is here, and you might find it a little easier to search on it if you just get to it from this, more on this function. So that's a fairly straightforward formula, last refresh plus last execution date. I can either just click the little green thing, green checkbox, or I can click OK. Now over here, available objects, so that's everything that I brought into this query when I created it. And it also includes variables that I created. These are local variables. So I can, that's the power of a variable. Once you create a variable, you can do things with it in other formulas. So for example, if I'm doing a really complicated formula, I may create multiple variables because I can, okay, the variable's working right and it's returning the data I want. So rather than doing a really long formula, I may do multiple variables and use the variables in the formula. All right, let's cancel out of that. So if I just click on this little header that says lines, that's actually a formula too. Name of lines. So lines is a variable, or you could call it an object or a field that's from the universe. and that just returns the name. Now here, what if I click right under it? That's the values that are stored in that field, right? Accessories, because we're in this nifty e-fashion universe. So when I click the next cell, they all say lines. And that's what's different, like if you use Excel a lot, that's what's different between BusinessObjects and Excel, because BusinessObjects is querying a database. So when you bring in lines, you can't change what the lines are. That's up to the gurus who, refresh the data warehouse. Sales revenue, and then I just did a little formula over here. So what have I got here? I've got a sum, so that's a function, sum of sales revenue, and I thought, I'll do a percentage. So asterisk, which is multiply, that's familiar, right? Times 0.3. So that's giving me 3% of sales revenue. All right. Questions so far?
Lee said I think it's 30%.
You know, you're right. Let me fix that. How about that? It's always good to be corrected before 9:30 in the morning, right? Thank you, Lee. What else? And you notice that I was able to just make that correction right in the window there. I could have opened up the variable. All right, well, I'm going to keep moving here. Format date. Why'd you use sum? Well, because that was the function that allowed me to do the... well, that's a good question, Michelle. So if I insert a column to the right, and I just take sales revenue, let's see if it'll let me do that. Gotta have my equal sign. Sales revenue times, and maybe I can even get rid of that okay, I didn't need sum. Good question. Now that brings me to predefined formulas. So when I do a right click, or there's other ways to get to it, but if I insert a sum on that column, right, it gives me a sum for that whole column for sales revenue. If I click there, it's got, oh wait a minute, I put it in the wrong place. Sorry about that. I wanted to put it on this one. Sum sales revenue. So that's, if I just insert a calculation, I am inserting a formula. Right? So let me look at some other predefined formulas. If I go to report elements, cell, predefined. So I've got the document name, prompt, like if I have prompts in my query, I can get the user response to the prompt, the page number, those are all formulas. So document name, and I just click it here. There we go, that's the document name. So that's a function, document name. All right, I'm going to move on to dates. So I've got store name, and I've got the opening date, which is from the universe. Well, it turns out when I hover over this, so every object has a type. And when you're, like if I compare one date to another, both of them have to have the type date. Well, whoever created this demo universe, our folks here at the U of M would never make a date that's not a date. But The vendors of business objects did create a date that's a text, so it doesn't do what I need it to do. So I put it here, and then I changed it to a date format, and then I made it a variable. So it shows up over here under variables, and if I hover on it, you can see what the formula is, but it'd probably be a little easier if I edit it. So it's type date time. So I use the a function.
Cindy says, can you show us how you made the variable?
I will in just a sec, Cindy. Be happy to do that. So under date, what is toDate? It returns a date from a date as a string. It's turning the text into a character string. And I had to put all this stuff in there because I had to tell business objects exactly how the text is formatted. So it's got 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit year, and then it's got hour, minutes, seconds, and AM, PM. So I turned it into a date. Now it's a date time. And then I could use another function, which is to pull out the year. And then I could use another function, which is days between. So I did current date. The days between this opening date and the current date divided by 365 to give me years since the store opened. And then just for fun, I did a little function day name of today. What day is it today? It's Tuesday. And if I refresh the report another day, it would tell me that day too. So, okay, so Cindy wants to know, how do I turn a formula into a variable? So here's a formula, right? Well, one way to do it is just to click the Create Variable button on the formula bar. And I'd give it a name. How many years? How long open? That's what I'll call it. So it's a dimension, and I'll talk in a minute about the difference between dimension and measure objects. Do I want to define it? I think it'll do that for me. Yeah, it's a number. It figured that out from what I used. And I click OK, and now this is a formula that is now a variable. So how long open? And let's say, so I'm going to, so it's replaced this formula. If you look up here, it's now a variable. So now that it's a variable, I could do things like I could filter on it. So let's try that. Add a filter. Filter is greater than 30. Will it let me do that? Yeah, it won't really let me, I guess I have to, yeah, it's something that's a little different. Greater than 22. Alright, so I could put a filter on it so I could filter out anything that was less than 22. Alright, let's talk for a minute about dimension objects and measure objects. So if I, let's see, what's a good example? Let me make an, I'll just put a little, I'll put a table over here. How'd you remove the filter? Okay, well, that's a good question. Right click, filter, remove. That's one way to do it. If you're working with a report that somebody else has created, you might want to do it this way. So if I didn't create the report and I don't know what filters are here, I might want to go over here to document structure and click on the table, and it shows me here's the filter it's got. That's useful if I'm coming after somebody else, and then I could remove it from there too. So there's always multiple ways to do things.
And Lee said, so when it was a formula, you could not filter it?
I don't think so. Darn, they've changed things in Business Objects. Man, Lee is really, well, let's see. Is that working? No, I can't filter. Okay, I am right. You can't filter on that column. I could filter on the whole table. You know, they do make some improvements with these upgrades. You can't count on it, but they do make some. So sometimes I'm a little out of date. It's funny because I've been working with formulas in Business Objects since 2001, and the basic way they work hasn't changed. The syntax has changed. But there are a few things that are cool. So I'll get back to that in a minute. But we're going to talk about dimensions and measure objects. So let me just put another report in here and bring in a few things. I'll bring in everything. Get rid of a few things. All right, so quantity sold is a measure object. How do I know that? Because it's got a little orange ruler next to it. Measure objects are dynamic, they're contextual. So look at quantity sold. It's calculating the number of objects that were sold, the number of things that were sold, based on what else is in the table. So if I get rid of lines, quantity sold changes because it's calculating based on what's in the table. So if I get rid of store name, then all we got is state and year. The number changes again. State is a dimension object. It's got a little blue parallelogram. The values in state are always going to be the same. So if I get rid of quantity sold, if I put store name back in there, it's going to repeat because we've got multiple stores in California. But the actual number of distinct values in state is not going to change. I could change the number of values when I, create the query, because I could filter out certain values, but in terms of what's actually in there, they stay the same. So that's the main difference between measure objects and dimension objects. Measure objects are going to be dynamic and contextual. All right, and I gave you a nifty little document in the Google Docs. I did a thing about objects and business objects that goes into more detail. There's a third kind of object that you don't see in the universe, in the data sets, and that's a detail object. You use detail objects, they're always associated with a dimension object, and when you're creating multiple queries, which we're not going to talk about today, detail objects is how you connect things from multiple queries to whatever you've merged, the merged dimension object. So you're telling business how these things are all connected, and that's how we use detail objects. That's about all I'm going to say about that for right now. I want to show you some more. So here's kind of a nifty function. It's called no filter. So I've got a filter on here. So if I go over here and open up that, you can see I've got a filter on, so I only display certain product lines. And so when I do sales revenue, it's a measure object, so it's only giving me a sum for the ones that I've displayed. But if I want to say ignore the filter when you do your calculation, I can put the no filter function on it. So that's kind of cool. There are also some very handy functions called summary filters. This is the query summary that you can just slap it in your query and it tells you some very useful things like how long did it take to run it last time and how many rows do you have. Looking at how many rows you have is a good way to validate your data. It's like, what did I expect? How much data did I expect to get? And then over here we have another one called the prompt summary.
Question?
Yeah.
Could you then add a calculation to show the percentage of filtered total to the total sales?
That's a very good question. Let's see. I think that you could. I'd probably, if I were going to do it, I would probably turn this in, both of them into variables. And I might have to do a little bit with calculation context, which I'm going to talk about in just a sec. So I don't think I can answer that one right off the bat, but I can get back to you. I will add it to the Google Doc. Oh, just one more thing about summaries. So prompt summary can just show you what are all the prompts and how were they responded to the last time you ran the report. So that's another handy one. And I just say, here's my text. This is the prompt summary function, and I wanted it to go to another line, and I wanted this to go to another line. So this is kind of wonky, but I had to use the character function, ASCII character 13, which makes it insert a line. So let's talk about calculation context. So here's a report where I've got a break on state. So it's divided by state. I put here's sales revenue. I put a calculation on it, so it's giving me sum of sales revenue. But the context is it's divided by state, so it's giving me the total sales revenue for that state. Now here's what's interesting. If I look down at the bottom here, this is the total because it's positioned in a footer for the whole table. If I click on this, it's the same formula. It's sum of sales revenue. This is sum of sales revenue. It's a measure object, sales revenue, so it's dynamic. It looks at where am I in the report. I'm at the bottom of the report. I'm not in the break. So the default context is where it is in the report. You can use calculation context, which can get very sophisticated. We're not going to get super sophisticated. But this is the somewhere over the rainbow function, ha ha ha. It's a somewhere, sum sales revenue, where state equals Florida, and you can see that it automatically gave me the subtotal for Florida, but I can actually force it to do that using calculation context. I can tell it the calculation context I want. Or I could change this, sum sales revenue in report, and that'll give me the whole thing. So a little more about calculation context. I got a little bit fancier here. So here I've got store name, and I've got a break on store name. And for my formula here, it's got sum sales revenue where store name equals eFashion Austin and lines equal accessories. So you can see here, here's the sales revenue for the store and that particular line, and I forced it to do that outside of the table. So you can start to imagine the possibilities for calculation context. Now I want to talk about if then else, because that can be very cool. So I did this one. Here's my if then else statement. If state equals New York, then some text, start spreading the news, else, oh well. So in my little table, I've got the stores and I've got the state, and for the ones where the state is New York, it displays this text, and for the others, it's testing to see if this condition is true. For those of you who use formulas in Excel, the functions are a lot the same. The syntax is different. But, that'll give you a head start. So I've got some time left. Any questions so far?
if-then does not require parentheses.
And I see the character function. Yeah, you know, if you use the actual words if then else, you don't have to put extra parens. If you use semicolons instead, you have to use parens.
And I may have misspoken. She has brackets on there. Your if-then does not require.
It's not brackets, it's always parens. Brackets go around objects, variables. So state or category or even date or the variables I've created, those all have to be enclosed in brackets. But if I had used a semicolon, you know, I guess I can demonstrate here. Let's see if I start getting into trouble. What happens if I put the semicolon? And it figures out because it knows the logic of if then else. Do I have to add? Yep. So if you can use the words if then else, let's see if it'll let me do that. Yeah, so I had to put in the parens when I replaced then and else with semicolons.
Great.
Still works the same. Oh, and Leah was asking about the character function.
Yeah, the ASCII 13.
Do you save this query sample somewhere? Yes, I put it under user shared, and it's. I'll show you where it is in just a sec. All right, so in this formula, let's open it. I wanted some text, so I enclosed it. If you only have text in a formula, you don't have to start with an equal sign. You don't have to put it in parens. If it's all text, you can just type it. But if you have text and other functions, then you have to use, you have to start with an equal sign. You have to put the text in double quotes. So here's my text. And then I wanted to insert a line. In fact, I wanted to insert 2 lines. So after the text, and it doesn't matter that I have an extra line in the formula. Just putting a line doesn't make that show up in the report. Character function. What the heck is the character function? Well, let's look under character. And in the documents that I gave you links to, I actually have a little description of all the different kinds of functions. Aggregate, character, data provider, you know, that's about the queries, date and time. Document, you know, that's stuff like who wrote it, prompt summary. Actually, well, I'll get back to that in a minute. The character function it just returns a character associated with an ASCII code. And it turns out the ASCII code for insert a line is 13. So I just put it in there and it gives me a line.
And, Cindy had asked, can you show an example of needing to test 2 conditions in an if-then-else? Can you show an example of needing to test 2 conditions in the if-then-else?
No, I don't know if I quite want to get into that quite yet. I think that's a little more advanced. I will provide an example in the Google Doc, but I don't think I'm going to get into that right now. While I'm here, I do want to show you 2 improvements since the upgrade. Okay, you don't see the line. Okay, it's right here. If I didn't have the character, I wouldn't. I'll show you what would happen. If I got rid of these guys, and just have the query summary. Oh, I lost my line. Does that make sense? Hard return. Thank you, Lee. That's true. So I hope that helps, Sherry. You see how that we lost that hard return. Oh, but what I wanted to show you that I think is very cool is oh, okay. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Sherry. So if I let's say, and if you're going to insert a formula, you have to be in a cell. So you could be in a column in a report, or you could, like I just inserted a blank cell. And then I can open up. So if I went into, I don't know why aggregate is always open by default. That's kind of annoying. But if I went into, if I went into a user response to a prompt, don't mean to make you dizzy here, sorry. Because I'm looking at all of them. And there's a lot of them. I mean, really, to me, this is one of the cooler features of Business Objects, because there's really a lot. Here we go. We're getting to the user response. This is an improvement. I can double click over here. And if I had multiple prompts, I just have to select it, and there it is. In the past, I'd have to go back and get the exact verbiage of the prompt to make this work. What is it? You know, when I put a prompt on year and it was 2006, if I refreshed the report and picked a different year, that's what would show up. And what's also true is that if I'm, let's say I wanted to do a sum, and then I go down here, sales revenue, and if you double click it, it puts the brackets around it, which is nice. And then let's say I'm doing a sum where. State. I may be off with the parens here. We'll find out, because it'll tell me where state equals, oops, did a double click. Here's what's great. I can click values. And I can pick from this list. This is new with the upgrade. Except I always forget that you only have to single click. Yeah. Now, let's see. I probably need parens here. And then I need a paren to go with this paren. Let's see if that'll do it. Come on.
And did you see Lee's question?
How do you know where to insert spaces? The spaces are more just for my edification. I don't think the space make any difference. Yeah, they don't. They just make it easier for me to read.
And Lee had asked, what is in values list?
So the values list was the values for state. So if I'll do it again. So I'll get rid of this part. Somewhere, let's say lines equal. And here's values. I always forget and I double click. They were. All the states that are in this query were in the list. So lines equals. So this is all the values for lines. If I had, you know, I might have filtered on state in the query and only brought up certain values for state. Exactly. So the values displayed are from the query. Yeah, so if I filtered out so I only had 5 values for state, the 5 values is what showed up, not because that would be, you know, in the real data warehouse, anytime you brought up values, if it was all the values that are stored, you wouldn't be able to get to it because they would be so incredibly long. So it's, yeah, the values you brought into the query. So jackets, there I go. Yeah, so that values and prompts, 2 very nice improvements. Oops. Now, here's the thing. If you get something wrong, really not very helpful. Missing aggregate operator or closing, well, it tells me there's no closing paren, but not very useful. I put the wrong one. But they have to line up, right? So I've got a paren here, so I have to have an end paren somewhere. Got a paren here, got to have an end paren somewhere. So I want to show you one really cool, fairly complex thing. So, but I'm going to get out of this. This is grouping. So our friend Doug Hovey, or maybe it's Hovey, I'm not actually sure, in FinOps created something that we should all be very glad to have. It's a macro in Excel that actually, because one of you had already asked me about if I have a list of values from the warehouse, could I group them differently? The answer is yes, you can. Why can't I do anything? Because I'm in reading mode. I need to be in design mode, so let me get rid of that. Delete. Come on, cell and section, fine. Delete this. What I'm doing right now is I'm gonna, so I have a list here. Well, that didn't work out well, did it? I have a list here of job descriptions, and I want to group them in my own special way. So I'm going to download this to Excel, and then I'm going to use this nifty macro, and I gave you a link to where you can download the macro yourself, to group it differently with a big honkin' if-then-else statement. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this. Delete. And I'm going to export this as Excel. But the truth is, I'm doing a Julia Child for you because I already have something that I've messed with. So I started with the Excel file that had the job code desker list, and then I created a column here. I just called it grouping. And so if the job description is Access Services Manager, then I just want to group it into a category called Manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So once I've done that, I'm going to copy this list or highlight the list, and then I've got an other category here for everything that didn't, if I want to handle new values that come in later. So I've downloaded this add-in, and it's got two little things here. This is for copying a list of values into BusinessObjects and formatting it correctly. This is the grouping function. And it's copied to clipboard. And again, I don't expect you to get this all right now, but I think you'll be able to understand it when you look at the page. So I'm going to insert a column here, and I'm going to bring up the formula, and I'm going to paste. And when I say a big if-then-else statement, so if job code desker in list, Access Services Manager, Applications Program Manager, then call it a manager. If it's this, then this. If this, then this. So actually, maybe this is what Cindy was asking. These are checking for multiple things. If this, if this, if this. And then at the very end, the semicolon is standing for else, or else call it other. Well, look at that. Glad to hear it, Kim. Yeah, Doug did us all a huge favor. And then, what if I want to turn this into a variable? Let's see. Turn into... I guess that's not where you did it. How'd I get the add-in? I gave you the link to the page on the Google Doc. So if I click here, And I'll just click here, create a variable, and I'm going to call it grouping. You're welcome. And now it shows up over here. And now I could filter on it or whatever. But that's all I got for today. Let me just take a quick moment and get out of this and show you. Leave the page. Get out of this. Get out of this. And the Google Doc is in web links, and when here's your incentive for sticking around and giving me feedback. It's linked on the feedback page where we have the polls. But I'm also going to send it to you. All right, public folders. It's under, well, it won't open right now. It's under public folders, user shared, Mackie J, IT4U, and it's called Sample Formulas for IT4U55. Don't use the one for the older one, 33. Use the one for 55. But that's all in the Google Doc. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to stop sharing. So, see at the bottom of the page here, web links, Google Doc. That is the Google Doc. So you click the name here, and then you click Browse to, and it should open it right up. Alrighty. Here's the link to the Google Doc. BusinessObjects resources and my link. We will do a closed caption version of the recording of today's webinar, and it'll be on the YouTube playlist within a week. If you're not already on my announcements list, you can sign up for that. And if you need additional help, you can contact the Service Center. Thank you very much. Please stick around. Give me some feedback. We're going to stop recording now. Y'all are welcome. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that.